Okay everyone, welcome to the video. Chosen the best chair to do this on, a squeaky one. Okay, we're going to get right on into it because it's probably going to be a long one, so sit back, relax and enjoy the video, or rather my little presentation. Okay, so let's start off this presentation and let's start off this whole thing by setting some ground rules, mainly for myself. By the way, this presentation I put together could be put together by a 12-year-old, so you'll have to pardon that. So what will we discuss, or what will I discuss? This presentation is going to be more than just power and how my power has developed over the years. It's going to be much more than that. Looking at development specifically from 2013 to 2020. I may end up jumping around a bit here, so get used to it, hey ho. I'm not here to lecture, I'm just here to inform. I'm here to give you the data and the insight from the last 7 years, and hopefully there's something to take away from it. So we'll go through a couple of things. We'll go through first, where was I in 2013, set that kind of groundwork, the key moments that altered my progression, things like crashes, injuries, changing coaches and whatnot. My FTP development, and I know it's not the be-all end-all, but we'll focus on that as a basis. My training volume and intensity, and then how racing has changed that progress, with key takeaways at the end. So as you can see at the bottom of this slide, if this video gets 400 likes, give it a thumbs up. I'll do a follow-up answering all your questions in the comments down below, because no doubt there's going to be questions. I have no doubt about it, okay? So next slide. It's like I've got somebody doing it for me. Where was I in 2013? So I was a first year professional in 2013, starting with Rapha Condor JLT. I was 19. I'd gone straight from the junior ranks to, I guess, the pro ranks as a first year under 23. There were lots of difficulties and life changes, and there was definitely a rude awakening when you make that type of jump, because I'd only been in the sport a couple of years, and going from almost like nothing to having to, travel, prepare like a professional, look after myself, and all the other things that you'd imagine come with it, was thrown on me very quickly. So as I said, I was with JLT Condor, which turned into JLT Condor with Rapha Condor JLT to begin with, who were a Continental, UCI Continental team in the UK. We had a very good setup, I may add, and it allowed us to travel the world and race some really exciting bike races, which we'll get on to in a short while. In terms of power, in 2013, I hadn't actually fully trained with one. I bought one for myself, but never actually trained with it like full time. It was only a power tap one, so I would kind of dip in and out of using it. For those of you who don't know, it's not like, I wouldn't have used that in races because it would be a very heavy wheel and it wouldn't be a very fast wheel. And then we'll get onto races later, but in terms of racing in 2013, which was my first year as a pro, I was thrown into a lot of races that were like really putting me out of my depth. So, I've been there in a very difficult moment of time. I've been on the receiving end, I've had my head kicked in, and 2013 was the time that was happening. So, as I said, this is just like, I'm shooting straight from the hip with this. This is what I experienced over those 7 years. So it's gonna get pretty detailed. So 2013, I've got a snapshot of each kind of season, taken from Strava actually, at the top of each slide usually. Then I've got my time in power zones on the left hand side, and I've just grabbed a picture from, not actually from 2013, but from 2012 when I was a last year junior, and I was fair to say going quite well as a junior rider, coming up from pretty much no background in cycling. And that was my FTP in 2013. So I've got a slide later on that will compare them all in one go, because right now we're just going to go through the years very briefly. But you'll be able to see the actual jumps all on one slide. So you don't have to pause the video just yet. So yeah, 2013, very much a transition year. I didn't use the power meter a lot. Like I said, I used it in training sometimes, but I didn't use it very, very often. 2014. Now, 2014 would be my second year as a professional, somewhat finding my feet, both with the training load, with the racing load, with the travel, with teammates and everything else. At this moment in time, I was getting coached by the people over at Welsh Cycling, and I don't really remember it being like that kind of specific and structured. Most of our training was actually sent to us via Excel spreadsheets, not like training peaks and things like that. So it wasn't like what you'd expect, I guess, a professional to receive. But maybe this is what it was like in 2013-14. I don't know. So you can see at the top of the screen here, 2014, the blue bar chart. You can see the first few weeks of 2014, very, very high volume, the highest volume of the whole year. That was when we were on our training camp in Australia, which we went to 3 years on the trot. We used to leave on Boxing Day, roughly, and come back in like the middle of February to the UK. So we'd spend like the best part of 6 or 7 weeks in Australia doing quite a lot of volume, like probably averaging around 20 to 30 hours a week. And not really having any rest weeks. As you can see, the bar graphs are pretty high there. I did race while I was there in Australia. So in 2014, I did the Bay Crits. I actually won the support races, so not the main event that Caleb Ewan has absolutely stamped his name on when he started riding like a good few years ago. But in 2014, I did a couple of things. I went to Australia, I did well there. I went to Rapha Condor. We actually went to Japan. We did the Tour of Japan, and then I won. Not long after that, I actually didn't finish the Tour of Japan. I got dropped and DNF'd on like the second or third stage out of 7 stages. Fast forward a couple of years later, I actually like almost finished top 10 overall, and then I won the Under23 Road Race Championships, which was probably one of like the best rides I've ever had on the road, and I can't really explain how that even happened. 2015 was like a transition year. Can't really find any photos from this period, but I am going to pull up my pro cycling stats for you to see that now in a second. We'll jump back and forth between that during this presentation, so you can kind of get an idea of how as I go along during this period, because at the end of the day what this video is trying to do is dissect and show you how I got to where I am today. Not necessarily like trying to say this is the only way, it's just an idea of like we all start with a baseline, and then this is where we get to eventually. So transition year in 2015, you can see now my FTP is kind of somewhat creeping up a little bit. It does every year, but you'll see later on it doesn't always jump as much, which is a given. My training distribution, as in my power graphs, still very much the same. Now I am training a lot more with the power meter now. It's actually a power to max, and I think I'm getting coached in 2015 by Tim Kennick, who you will know. Pete, his brother, rode for Sky for a number of years. So yeah, and then my training distribution over the weeks over that year, you can see my off season quite clearly at the bottom of that graph. So I'm just going to jump on over to my actual year in 2015 on Pro Cycling Stats, and you can see the kind of season I had. So I went to Tour de Loire, which is a nasty long arduous race in northern France. DNF. And Post-Ras, did a good ride there, like consistently actually. Really enjoyed that race in Ireland. Picked up a third on one of the stages, and then the Tour de Korea, where I actually did a fairly decent ride, came 9th in the youth classification, but nothing spectacular. I was almost still on a learning curve, still trying to figure out like what I was good at, and almost had no idea really. I was just going to races, doing what I was told, never had a say in what races I was going to really, and therefore had this kind of just floating about mindset where I never really understood, you know, what being specific to something was, what trying to train for something specifically and dedicate myself to something was. You know, bearing in mind I'm still only maybe 4 years into the sport, which is still very young really for a lot of people. So jump back to the slideshow. Boosh. Easy. 2016 is a hefty volume year. I did quite a lot of hours, probably the upper end. I think 2016 was probably the most volume I ever did, and represented itself in this jump in FTP. So you go from 2015 5.3 watts per kilo to 5.6 for an FTP, and like I said, quite a bit of volume throughout the whole year and very little in terms of rest. You know, time in power zones is still almost the same as others, a lot more time in zone 2. But again, it's very interesting when you go back and you look at what races you did. And this year, in 2016, I did the Istrian Spring Trophy in Croatia, which was actually a really good early season stage race. Again, I had like no real say what we were doing there. It was basically just to clear the tubes, get yourself race ready. Far too early in the season for me. I probably still am useless at being like race fit for March. I think that's just natural. A lot of people seem to go better in August. I think I'm one of those people. Getting ready for a race in March, really, really hard for me. Tour de Normandy, classic. Some of the best bike riders ever have come from that race and won that race. I'm happy to say that I never did very well at that race. Crosswinds and, you know, typical French terrain, northern France terrain. Does that make any sense? It doesn't, does it? Back to the Ampos Ras. I had a 6th on one stage, and for some reason I can't quite remember. I was a DNS, did not start for one stage. I don't know what happened there. I know I crashed in one of them, and it might have been that one, but I have no idea. Crashed quite badly. Came back, and then if you look just a month, not even a month later actually that's not even a month, that's like 2 weeks later, I went to the Tour of Korea, and actually did a really good ride of the Tour of Korea. That edition, One Pro Cycling were there, which were another UCI Continental team in the UK before they went to Pro Conti. They held the yellow jersey, and the race blew apart on the 194k stage, which you can see here, stage 6 blew apart, and I managed to get in the break. Well, there was like 7 breaks, I think. It was that hard of a day, yeah, I managed to move myself up to 2nd in the youth classification, which the picture you see in the thumbnail, me in the white jersey, that's me wearing the white jersey for the guy who was actually leading, I think, the sprints competition at the time. So that was a breakthrough ride for myself in 2016. I then did not finish the major UK races, which is again classic. So yeah, we see me, actually I'm here, that's me on the podium, and then down in the bottom here is actually me with Stevie Williams on my wheel, who was riding for us at the time. Stevie Williams was kind of also finding his feet, and this was before he then went to, I think it was Barry McLaren, so he went World Tour. So yeah, 2017, I also call this a breakthrough year because actually if you see, my weight goes from like 63 to 61 kilos. And this is average weight, what I'd usually see on the weigh-in scale. Not that I weigh myself like a lot, because after a certain amount of time you just kind of know where you're at. And this one again, like, you know, power zone distribution doesn't really change. It's what you'd imagine, to be honest. It's what you'd imagine. And again, like 2017 was almost like a perfect year in terms of, you know, no kind of big rest periods that were forced, no injuries, you know, just a typical kind of 2-week off-season transition period near the end there. And another big year, you know, 900 hours. So that was actually probably my biggest year. And I hadn't gone, so this year and the year before, I hadn't gone to Australia. The team went to do a training camp, but I wasn't selected to go just because like the races didn't suit me and stuff. So I opted to stay at home. I think I went on a training camp to like Tenerife or Mallorca, and actually just did like 2 weeks of good training. But I have to admit, like the training camps, and Teo Hart said this recently after winning the Giro, that he doesn't feel the need to like go away and do training camps. He can still do them in the UK, and I 100% agree with Teo. So in 2017, I started to kind of almost like realize that there was something, now that I was starting to slowly develop. And when I say slowly develop, I don't mean like it's taken me a year. It's literally taken me like 5 to 6 years to finally get to see like I've actually got a strength. And I get a question asked to me a lot, like in the comments on YouTube. There might even be a comment on this video, like, how do I know what my strength is? Like, I want to be a climber. And like, if you're a young rider and you're asking those questions, like half the time they're like the wrong question to ask, because you never know what you're going to be good at unless you are like Hugh Carthy, who is, you know, when he was 16, 17 as a junior, he looked exactly the same then as he does now. Then you can say with some kind of confidence that this is what, you know, you're supposed to do. But like for me, I was like 64, 65 kilos, you know, 177 centimeters, and like I wasn't a sprinter, I wasn't a climber, I wasn't like, you know, a descent, like I couldn't, there was nothing that really like I could say I was. But it wasn't until like this time in 2017 where I actually started to dabble in hill climbing and also dabble in like nutrition tactics, where, you know, you tend to limit your carbohydrates, you tend to like, you know, play around with your macronutrients. And that was where I started to like lose the weight, and lose the weight quite easily until I got to like 60.5, 60 kilos. And this was in 2017. Now it's 3 years later. I'm now capable of staying there without trying. You know, a couple of you who are older are probably going to say, wait till you're 30 and then you're just going to like go back to 65. But like it took me, since like, I know like weight is a touchy subject, but when I was a junior and when I was an under-23, I never thought about weight once. And to be honest, I didn't even like know how it all kind of worked. I managed okay. You can see I still had good results. But it was never like the driving factor. The driving factor was always training. It was never weight. And then once I realized that actually like 63 kilos is not like, I can be lighter without losing power. It wasn't until I was like 24-ish, 23, 24, when I started to play around with it. So when I get the question like, you know, why didn't you move out to like Italy or like climbing paradise? You ask that question because you're looking at me now as somebody with a really high like watt per kilo and able to fly up the climbs. But when you rewind the clock and you look at me like when I was like 22, 23, when you'd expect riders to be, you know, out in Italy flying up the climbs and trying to get their pro contract, I was actually being dropped because I wasn't, natural development and, you know, my actual knowledge on cycling and sport was actually pretty poor then. You know, I was more of like a, I'll do what you tell me and I'll get on with it. So in 2017 was like a massive year, because not only like coming out of my shell and realizing that I had something, but looking at like the races I did, like there's no wonder I did over 900 hours of riding that year. So we started the year with the Tour of Normandy. I had my best ever riding at the Tour of Normandy. Not placing, it's like placing doesn't really tell the story. So when you look at results, it doesn't really tell the whole story. But when you look at how I rode it, I was confident, I was able to ride there in the crosswinds, I was able to look after our sprinters, I was able to like move up and cut through echelons and get back to the front. that was a different me. And then the Ampos Ras, same thing again. This was the year I think that we actually won the Ampos Ras. It came down on the last stage. James Gullen, who won it for our team, which was then JLT Condor. Me and James Gullen, the team had worked all day really hard, and we got to the finishing circuits on the very last stage, and like poo hit the fan, and it was just me and James. So I was left there to defend the L jersey. We had to pull the brake back almost single-handedly between us two, and we managed to keep the L jersey on that last day. We almost lost it, but that was another like standout moment to me, that actually, you know, I don't have to win the race, but being there for somebody like indicates performance. So Tour of Korea then went straight on to do that again a couple of weeks later. That was usually the format with those races. May and June was usually very, very busy for me during that period. And I started to become the guy who was almost relied upon in stage races, rather than the first couple of years. I was actually the guy who, you know, well, you wouldn't take the stage races because you just get dropped, quite frankly. So the Tour of Korea, I didn't have my best result at Tour of Korea, but I did actually, I was there in a support role, which is still just as good. And then the Volta Portugal, which is, some of you might have heard of it. It is a massive event, the longest stage race I've ever done, and quite frankly, I've never felt better during a stage race. Going for that length of time, I absolutely loved it. So that was brilliant. Now, getting into obviously closer territory now, so we're over 6 watts per kilo for FTP. 2018, this was the year when everything started to kind of, I guess, fall apart. I don't want to romanticize it, but I crashed. You can see a big gap there at the top of the screen where my bar graph just drops off a cliff. I crashed in Canada, the Tour de Beauce. I almost finished top 10 in the mountain finish at that race. And there's a couple of, well, all of those pictures are from that race actually. So the time trial, the day before I crashed, the rainy, wet road stage, which actually had the summit finish on. Really enjoyed that race, by the way. And then like a great black and white picture of me basically chewing the tarmac, or getting up, looking in a bit of a daze. The biggest crash I've ever had in my career, like without a doubt. But I had a huge volume period. You can see 707 hours of training that year, and you can actually see that the back end of that year, there's hardly any volume. I mean, it really does drop off. So it shows how much volume I did in that first period. And I'll show you the races I did that year as well. And you can really see that, like, you can see the FTP increase is 6.2, so it's only a little bit. It's an FTP freeze plus the lowest point, but you'll see how a small blip like that really doesn't affect, or can't have an effect if you don't let it, on your next couple of years. So looking at like my 2018, I'll have to get it up now because I'm on a roll. So in 2018, I did the Istrian Spring Trophy again. Nothing really to write home about, apart from the 13th place on a little summit finish. Tour Yorkshire, I did my first ever Tour Yorkshire in 2018. It took that long. I was on a team that could ride the Tour Yorkshire, but I never got a say in because I just, A, wasn't good enough, couldn't climb, and like basically there was always stronger riders on our team, so I never really got a look in. Then I went to the Tour of Japan and absolutely had the ride of my life. I think the Tour of Japan I'm really proud of. I came 16th overall, but that doesn't tell the whole story because the penultimate stage, which is like here, I came 20th, and it's also the hilliest stage. The day before we finished up Mount Fuji, I came 11th on the Mount Fuji stage, so massive hilltop finish. And the day I came 20th, which is where I actually fell down the general classification, was because I had a snap gear cable with 6k to go, and that was like, it was devastating. Well, it was even more devastating for John, team manager John Herity, who was in the team car. He was not happy, not with me, but with like just the bike going wrong at a critical time. So, you know, it was one of those moments where you couldn't help it, but you know, it is what it is. Like you just have to deal with it. And then the Tour de Beauce, had a really good ride there. 10th on that summit finish day. This was like probably the third race I'd ever done where I was actually kind of team leader then maybe. So the Tour of Portugal, we were all kind of free fall, but I was probably in the best place mentally than a lot of the other riders, I think it's fair to say. So I wanted to give it my best, and well, not give it my best, but I wanted to do a ride. So the lads rode for me a couple of times. Not that I really like did anything, but it was still great that they could ride for me. The Tour of Japan, they rode for me, which was really great. And then the Tour de Beauce, they rode for me. So it was 3 opportunities really that I had to win a race, or to at least be the GC rider. And a couple of things went wrong each time. So, you know, that's the way the cookie crumbles, so to speak, sometimes. And that was like pretty much like I did not start the national champs, obviously, because I was still out with injury. And then I managed to pick it up for the hill climb season, and like do pretty well in the hill climb season. So it wasn't like all bad news, but you know, it's not brilliant, you know what I mean? So anyway, 2019, you know, this is the year where I became British hill climb champion. It's also the year where I changed teams. I also coached myself that year and this year, but I coached myself in the latter part of 2018 after the crash in Canada. I basically said I don't want to be coached anymore. I need to get myself back into cycling like myself after the injury. And then it just so happens that the team folded, sponsorship ran out, and the team collapsed. So that was like quite a depressing time. I don't use that word lightly, obviously. You know, no offense, but I was at a pretty low point, and wondered whether or not I'd still be able to race for a team in 2019, which I did for Swift Carbon. I didn't do as much like volume that year, but you can see a lot of it is undulating periodization, so a lot of high volume, low volume with high intensity, and then back up and back down. And you can already see that in the time in power zones chart there, where I'm spending less time in zone 2, more in zone 1, and then more in zone 3, 4, 5 and 6. So pretty obvious. But FTP still fairly stagnant. You know, you look at that there, 6.2, 6.1, 6.2, 6.2. So for 3 years, it pretty much stays at 6.2. You know, so it is what it is. 2020, the year I get to wear the stripes. A weird year because obviously racing is somewhat cancelled, but I also stepped away from racing for a team and I decided to do my own thing. And obviously we haven't finished the year yet, so my hours are lower. My kilometers are quite high because I've been doing a lot of indoor riding, you know, on Zwift, so we kind of cut that out, like don't pay any attention to the kilometers ridden. There's a big kind of surge in volume in August where I concentrating on the Tour de Stations, but that is a proper block of just zone 3 and sweet spot to prepare for an event that was like 9,000 meters of climbing and 230k, so very, very specific. And then tapering for the hill climb season, which ended up being non-existent because of well, COVID. So however, you look at my FTP. Now, FTP here has obviously shot up a lot, and this is really interesting. It's funny, we're just going to come to the end of this now and compare like what we've seen. So don't worry, you haven't got long. Unless you're watching this on the turbo, then well done for you. 385 watts at 60 kilos, 6.4 watts per kilo. Now I haven't actually done 385 watts for a whole hour. I've never done that. But I've done 385 watts for almost 35 minutes. Again, that's not a whole... Why is it giving me like weird adverts, Google? What are you doing? So here I've done 384 watts, which is 6.4 watts per kilo. On a circuit, okay, on a time trial circuit that I've raced, it's a 15 mile time trial. Done 15 mile time trials on this circuit for like 8 years. And this was my fastest ever time on this circuit, done on a road bike at 6.4 watts per kilo. Now, I am in pretty good control here, so for those naysayers that want to say, well, you can't do 380 watts for an hour, well, okay, I probably can't, but it's going to be pretty close. It's going to be within the range of 6.2 to 6.4 watts per kilo. I can say that with quite a bit of certainty, to be honest. So there you have it, there's proof. This is my training volume and distribution, all compiled to make it easier for you to see. With the art of YouTube, you can pause and look at this yourself. I don't have to. I've basically talked through what I've listed at the bottom there already, so any questions, shoot them down below. Training intensity, you've seen this develop. I would ignore that first one, the top left, 2013, just because I didn't really ride with the power meter a lot. But the other years, every single ride was pretty much with a power meter, like almost every single ride. So yeah, training distribution. Interesting how zone 2 is gradually falling, like since 2017. And pay attention, because some of the axes are different, so they're not all comparable. So again, pause the video and see what you like from that. And there's my FTP development over the years. I mean, yeah, we were going to name this video like from average cyclist to world tour professional numbers, but not going to do that, because what average cyclist does 5 watts per kilo for FTP? I mean, granted there are, but I didn't want to. That's not the way. That's not the way I roll. So there you have that. There it is, side by side. And now the biggest takeaways, which I feel like this is probably the bit most of you are going to come back to and rewatch, because these are some of the biggest takeaways that I've pinpointed. There are more, like there's bound to be more. If you've picked up on anything, let us know in the comments, because that's what's brilliant about like my little community. You're really, really good at picking up on the little things, and you're really good at sharing them. So keep doing what you're doing. Consistency, right? I'm not gonna like harp on about it because you hear it all the time, but I did 3 6 to 7 week Australia camps between 2013 and 2015. I did lots of stage races. Some were the same, but some were different. I think that's key about it, is always having something different stimulus. And even some of those stage races, even if they were the same races, they'd be on different courses, so they weren't always the same. Again, being specific, my breakthrough happened, I think, when I started thinking I was a climber, and that changed everything. Even my attitude going to the bigger races, like the Tour of Portugal, like the Tour de Beauce in Canada, and the hill climb stuff in the UK, which is just the specific races, actually prepared me really well, both nutritionally, by testing things, and also just getting me in that kind of headspace that, wow, like I can climb hills fast, and that's something I can do. Volume, you've seen a couple of things there, but it decreased. But technically I've been racing more because I've been racing on Zwift. I've been doing more, kind of zone 1 and more 456, zone 456, naturally, because of the courses that I race on, and etc, etc. But it has a direct correlation, interestingly, to the previous years of racing, road races and what have you. So it's almost like not a fast track, but it has done well, I think, in replacing that outdoor racing, especially this year with no road racing. Don't worry about illness and injury. I hear this all the time, but don't stress. Don't sweat the small stuff. Like, it is quite literally like such a long career a lot of people have, and you're gonna enjoy it, and you're gonna get the most out of it and the best out of it if you just look after yourself and don't stress when you get injured or ill. Just let it pass. All right, don't rush into things. Don't be afraid to stay in the same environment if that environment suits you. I stayed in the same team basically until it folded. It was a very successful team, which helped me stay there. But I wasn't on a big pay. In fact, I was on, I think it was like £5,000 a year, which were labelled expenses. So that's basically nothing. I lived off the bank of mum and dad, basically. Shout out mum and dad, you were brilliant, by the way. But also, like, prize money. It was like that incentive that I would go and do these races and train my hardest, because you know you were riding the best races, you had exposure, you were going to try and win so that you could, you know, basically go and ride for a better team. We'd also get prize money from that, and that's a good incentive, instead of having, you know, 30 grand a year paycheck. But you know, if your environment is good, if you've got good teammates, good manager, good coach, things like that, sometimes you got to think to yourself, well, actually this is a great work-life balance, and is it worth going all in and changing things? And then ask questions all the time. Be a sponge. Something I not regret, but I was very shy. Because I was so new to the sport, I didn't really ask questions, which is what you think you would do. But deep down, I'm like a big introvert, so asking questions and doing things like that, I was terrible at. I would never ever put my hand up to say, I'm feeling good today, I want all the boys to ride for me. The manager would have to say it, or some other rider would have to say it. He'd say, hey, you're going really well, or you're looking good, you were looking good yesterday in yesterday's stage when we ran up that climb. And I'd be like, yeah. And they'd be like, I think we need to ride for you today. I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah. And having, you know, having that courage to do that and to say that and to stand up for yourself is sometimes what will get you what you want, or will get you what you want, more times than you think. And then big power doesn't have to mean big responsibility. So just because you have all this power, just because, you know, you might be progressing every year really well and you have like a 6+ watt per kilo FTP, doesn't mean you have to go and do what everybody else has done with that. You don't have to do that. You can do your own thing, you can forge your own path, you can take that to sponsors, you can take that to you know, teams if you want to. You can do whatever you want. You know, just because you have big power numbers doesn't mean you have to go and race on the track, or you have to go and, you know, climb the biggest mountain. You can do what you want with that power. That's the beauty of it. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it, to be honest, even though the presentation's a little bit kind of, you know, iffy. I could have done a better one when I was in school. But I hope you got more from just the story and the context, and maybe picked up a couple of things as opposed to, you know, just going off of nice visuals. So yeah, like I said, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, comment below and I'll make another video very, very soon if you give me a bit of time. But I really appreciate you watching. It's a very long one, but I appreciate getting this far. Yeah, just thank you so much. I'll see you soon.